I'm going to start kind of at the beginning without getting too philosophic, but I think it's important that we go back to first principle. If you boil political philosophy down to its essence, I would say that it posits really only two claims for just rule, for legitimate political rule. The first is wisdom or virtue, which if we recall our Plato and Aristotle, they turn out to be the same thing. Knowledge is virtue, virtue is knowledge. Second is consent. Now these appear to be very distant, but they're not on examination quite as distant as they appear. And there's no need to go into that now, although I do have an explanation if anybody wants to hear it later. So the key things for us to understand are these. Prior to the American Revolution, all claims to just rule were essentially based, to the extent that people made a claim and didn't just say, I have the power and I'm in charge, they were based on wisdom/virtue. The divine right of kings is basically an updated or debased, depends on how you want to look at it, version of this idea. Now John Locke showed that, for instance, in his very little read first treatise. Everybody reads the second treatise, nobody reads the first treatise. I had to read it in grad school, and I'm glad I did. I'm sorry that David Azrad is not here, because he wrote his dissertation on the first treatise, in which he says the conventional understanding of the first treatise, which I have always hewed to, is all wrong. And you could have asked him about that. He could have explained why I was wrong. Anyway, the American founders say, bollocks, right? Divine right of kings is false. The claim to virtue and wisdom, as that's the only just title to rule, is false. King George is not sufficiently wise to rule us without our consent, and we therefore withdraw our consent. That means they need to make a new claim to just rule. Actually, it's an open question whether they really needed to make a new claim. Lincoln says that they didn't. Lincoln famously called the Declaration of Independence a merely revolutionary document, by which he meant sort of a Dear John letter, right? Does anybody remember what that was? It was a famous phrase from World War II where you go off to war and the military, eventually you get some letter written 9 months ago and it's your girlfriend back home saying, Dear John, sorry man, it's over. It was kind of like saying to the King George, Dear John, Dear George, it's over, we're leaving. Now they could have simply said, we're doing it because we can. We don't have to give you a justification, but they didn't. They made a justification. Why? Well, the Declaration of Independence itself says that they're doing so out of a decent respect for the opinions of mankind. But that only means they needed to tell the reasons for the separation, in other words, the central part of the Declaration, the charges against the king. However, they went further than that. They made theoretical claims for what just government is. Why did they do that? Well, Lincoln said to set up a standard maxim for a free society, to set up a permanent bulwark against tyranny, to set up, in a sense, a guarantor of American liberty for all time. Okay, to set up a new basis for government. What is that basis? I would say that basis is social compact theory. Now, social compact theory, a lot of people assert, and people have asserted this recently against some things that I've written, they say it's not real, it's not meant to be real, it's a mental construct or an analogy. But that's not how the originators of social compact theory saw it. They saw it as real. Government exists when people get together, form a compact, and say, we are now a people, we're going to establish a government to protect and advance our own interests, to secure our own rights. This is very clear from John Locke. I have two quite long quotes here, which I think I won't read, but it's very clear from John Locke, and it's clear from statements that the founders, our founders, made. Now, social compact theory, it's true, is implicit in most countries, right? But that doesn't mean it's abstract or a mental construct. So you don't, when was the English social compact founded? You can't really say. Does England have a birthday? It really doesn't, right? Still, in a constitutional monarchy that protects people's rights, which England became, I would say arguably subsequent to the American Revolution, there is government by compact if implicit. But the compact in the United States is explicit. It's formed on July 4th, 1776. Okay? Now, this quote I will read. This is from James Madison, who's explaining to us what a social compact is. And he doesn't mean this as a mental construct or an analogy or a hypothetical. He says this is real. He says, it is proper to keep in mind that all power in just and free governments is derived from compact, that where the parties to the compact are competent to make it, and where the compact creates a government and arms it not only with a moral power, but the physical means of executing it, it is immaterial by what name it is called. Its real character is to be decided by the compact itself, by the nature and extent of the powers it specifies, and the obligations imposed on the parties to it. Here's another relatively short quote. This is from the State Constitution of Massachusetts from the founding era. The body politic is formed by a voluntary association of individuals. It is a social compact by which the whole people covenants with each citizen, and each citizen with the whole people, that all shall be governed by certain laws for the common good. Okay, now I think that more or less disposes of the question of what is the nature of a social, whether or not the United States is based on a social compact. But now we have to ask, what is the nature of that compact? As noted, and this is very clear from the Declaration of Independence, which I won't quote because everyone's heard it a million times before. If you hadn't, you shouldn't, so go home and read it tonight. As noted, the key pillar is consent. Consent is required from all parties. All parties consent at the initial establishment of the compact. Later parties, for instance, the children of compact members, they're not there. If you're born after the Declaration of Independence, someone would say, well, you didn't consent. Well, the founders have an answer for that. They consent by not emigrating, which means there must be a natural right, an inherent natural right to emigrate. If we're going to say that all government is based on compact, we can't force you to stay here forever. We can't say that your allegiance is perpetual. And the Congress, the US Congress, made this clear from the Expatriation Act of 1868, which in part reads, "The right of expatriation is a natural and inherent right of all people," and goes on to say, "Any declaration, instruction, opinion, order, or decision of any officers of this government which restricts, impairs, or questions the right of expatriation is hereby declared inconsistent with the fundamental principles of the government," which means with the fundamental principles of social compact theory. Now, you cannot join the compact without the explicit consent of its existing members. I think that's simply logical. I don't need to quote anybody, although I could. I don't need to appeal to philosophic authority on this point, although I could and have. I can point you to several things that I've written in recent months. That's just logical. A compact that can be joined by anyone, regardless of the wishes of its current members, is an oxymoron, a self-contradiction, an impossibility. It is not a compact. Another founder, I will quote, this is James Wilson, a lawyer, who wrote a lot about American law at the establishment of our government, says, "In the social compact, each individual engages with the whole collectively, and the whole collectively engage with each individual. These engagements are obligatory because they are mutual. The individuals who are not parties to them are not members of the society." That's important, so I kind of shouted it. Maybe I'll read it again. "The individuals who are not parties to them are not members of the society." Or this is very blunt and pithy, from a blunt and pithy man, Gouverneur Morris, somewhat obscure these days. I'm not sure people remember who he was, but he's the guy who actually was tasked, having sat through the entire Constitutional Convention, with writing it. In other words, the preamble, the stirring language stuff in the Constitution, that was all him. He said, this is a quote from the convention itself before it wrapped in August of 1787, "Every society from a great nation down to a club had the right of declaring the conditions on which new members should be admitted." All right. I'm not going to go into the 14th Amendment because Ed's going to do that. Maybe I'll go into it somewhat in Q&A or any of the other laws on this. I'm just trying to establish the fact that the United States is a government based on social compact theory. The idea of birthright citizenship or of any involuntary citizenship is inconsistent with social compact theory. So if you want to reject those principles, you have to reject social compact theory, which means you have to reject the bedrock basis, philosophic, legal, political, constitutional bedrock basis for the legitimacy of the United States government, and really of all free government, because you don't have free government if you can be forced to do something against the citizenry's will. Then what are we left with? Well, as I said, I think political philosophy really only posits two possibilities. So we're left with the rule of the wise, or the divine right of kings, or the divine right of bureaucrats, or the divine right of Democratic senators on the Judiciary Committee. Given the behavior of the left lately, that's clearly what they'd prefer. After all, they're pretty sure that they are the wise. I'm pretty sure they're not. But whether they are or are not, I don't want to be ruled by the wise. I'd much rather prefer to be ruled by consent under social compact theory. That's just me, a crank, as I said at the beginning. But the mystery to me is why so many ostensibly on the conservative side of this debate go along with the other side. But they do, as I found, having restated this case now, I think 4 times since July of 2018, and the reaction against me from my ostensible allies on the right has been furious, and against all of us has been furious. They do think, for whatever reason, this is the hill for conservatism to die on. I see a lot of other hills. that we need to be fighting on, other than this one. I don't expect to convince them of that, but I would hope that I have made some headway in convincing some of you.
Thanks, Mike.